She hadn't meant to go up there. Not really. The attic had always been the place of forgotten things, where dust settled in quiet surrender, where time folded in on itself, and where memories lived beneath blankets of insulation and silence. Elaine was 61 when she finally opened the attic door of her childhood home for the last time. The house had been sold. Her mother, Mary, had passed away 5 months earlier, and though most of the rooms had been emptied of their things, they hadn't yet been emptied of their ghosts. It took Elaine months to return, not because she was avoiding grief, but because she wasn't sure what version of it would greet her. Her mother was a quiet woman, strong in the way that never asked for applause. She raised Elaine alone after her husband, Elaine's father, died in a car accident when Elaine was barely 3. And though Mary kept the house tidy, the fridge stocked, the holidays warm, there was always something unsaid, unspoken, unfinished. Her mother had been a master of folding pain into routine, of pressing sorrow into linens, of tucking heartbreak behind closed doors. The attic was one of those doors. On that final Thursday in the house, Elaine stood in the upstairs hallway for a long moment before reaching for the attic cord. The ladder creaked as it unfolded, reluctant but obedient. She climbed slowly, one hand on the rail, one hand over her chest, as if bracing for more than just dust. The bulb overhead flickered to life when she pulled the string, casting soft amber light over boxes, bags, a collapsed baby crib, a rocking chair with a frayed cushion. She took a breath. The air smelled like old paper and wood and something older still, time maybe. She told herself she'd be up there for 10 minutes. Just enough to make sure nothing valuable had been left behind. But memory doesn't measure time the way clocks do. She moved slowly, opening lids, lifting covers. There were Christmas decorations from the 80s, a broken lamp, a stack of National Geographics, and a suitcase full of scarves. And then, tucked behind a sewing machine and an old rotary fan, she saw it, a small wooden trunk. Plain, dusty, no label, no lock, just waiting. She felt her stomach shift. Her knees cracked as she knelt in front of it. Her fingers hesitated on the latch. The lid opened easily. Inside, a soft blue baby blanket, a tiny rattle, a plush rabbit with one button eye missing, and beneath them, carefully placed in a bed of cloth, was a cassette recorder, the kind from the 1960s, square and gray with plastic buttons. Beneath it, 5 cassette tapes, each in a paper sleeve, each labeled in the same, unfamiliar handwriting. To Mary, September 1964, to Mary, October 1964, to Mary, November 1964, and so on. Mary, her mother. Elaine froze. The handwriting was unfamiliar and masculine. She picked up one tape. Her hands trembled. The paper was yellowed, but the ink still clear. The strokes were careful, deliberate. Her breath caught. Something in her chest, some quiet, long-forgotten thing, stirred. She lifted the recorder carefully, like it might break if she breathed too hard. She descended the ladder and walked down the hall like she was holding an artifact. She plugged it into the wall socket in her mother's old bedroom. The red light blinked. She inserted the first tape, pressed play, and then the past broke open. There was static, a low hum, then a voice. "Hey sweetheart, it's me. I know it's late where you are. Just wanted to hear myself say something, I guess. This place is loud during the day, but so still at night. Makes a man think." Elaine's knees gave out. She sat down on the carpet. She didn't breathe. The voice was male, warm, tired, alive. It belonged to no one she'd ever met, and yet filled her with something she couldn't name. She listened. "I miss you. A lot. I wish I could be there. I keep picturing you holding the baby. What did we say we'd name her if it was a girl? You always liked old names. Not sure how I feel about Elaine, but it's growing on me." Elaine covered her mouth with her hand. Tears blurred her vision. Her name, her father, the man who died before she could remember the shape of his face, had spoken her name. "I hope she's stubborn," the voice continued. "I hope she's got your laugh. I hope she never lets the world quiet her down." The voice cracked a little. Then it steadied. "Tell her I love her. even if she doesn't remember me. And with that, the tape clicked off. Elaine sat there a long time. The room didn't move. The air didn't shift. But something inside her did. She felt as if the world had tilted just slightly. Like she had always been a degree off balance and didn't know it until something clicked back into place. She stared at the player. The next tape waited beside her. And she wasn't ready. Not yet, but she would be. Because for the first time in 61 years, she had heard her father's voice. And somehow, that voice had made her feel more real. She didn't listen to the second tape right away. That night, Elaine placed all 5 tapes in a small wooden bowl on the kitchen table and just looked at them, as if they might speak without being played. The first one had shaken something loose in her, something she couldn't yet name. It wasn't grief exactly. Grief was familiar, sharp, often expected. This was something gentler but stranger. A warmth that burned through the center of her chest like a light flickering on in a room that had been dark for decades. She made tea with hands that moved slowly, deliberately, as if her body understood something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. She didn't speak to anyone that night, didn't turn on the television, didn't pick up a book. She just sat, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the hallway where she had first heard the voice, letting her thoughts move like mist across still water. At some point, she fell asleep in her mother's old recliner, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. She dreamt of walking through a hallway lined with mirrors, each one reflecting not her own face, but a man's, the same man, looking at her with eyes she didn't recognize, but somehow trusted. In the morning, everything was quieter than usual. The birdsong outside sounded softer. The hum of the refrigerator felt more distant. She didn't check her phone, didn't open the blinds. She sat at the table again, looking at the tapes. The second one read October 1964. Her fingers hovered over it. She placed it in the recorder and hit play. This time, the voice came through faster, like he was excited. "Hey Mary, guess what? I got the package. The blanket, perfect. And the little rabbit? She's gonna love that. I know she can't even sit up yet, but still. I held it last night and pictured her holding it someday. You've got good taste. You always did." Elaine smiled barely. There was something so ordinary in his tone. Not poetic. Not grand. Just a man speaking plainly to the woman he loved about the daughter he hadn't yet met. He went on. "They gave me leave for Christmas. I haven't told anyone but you. I wanted to be a surprise. I want to knock on the door and just be home again. Even if it's just for a week." His voice cracked slightly on the word home, and Elaine felt her own throat tighten in response. "I know I've missed a lot already. I know you're tired. I can hear it in your letters. But you've always been stronger than me, you know. I married up." He laughed, a soft exhale. "And I hope she has that same strength. I really do." The tape went on like that, 10 minutes of fragments. Weather reports. Army rumors. A dream he had about walking with a little girl holding his hand. He described her face in the dream. Chubby cheeks, dark hair, eyes too big for her head. "She didn't say anything," he said. "She just looked up at me and smiled. That smile undid me." Elaine leaned forward unconsciously, as if trying to catch every breath between the words. When the tape ended, she didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, she found herself whispering, "You were trying to be here." She didn't know if she meant it as forgiveness or understanding or both. But the words felt right. Over the next 3 days, she allowed herself only 1 tape per day. She treated each one like a chapter in a story she wasn't sure she was ready to finish. The November tape came next. "Mary, today was rough," it began. "Some of the guys didn't come back. Can't talk about it. Don't want to." There was a pause, then a long breath. "Tell me about the baby's laugh. Write it down for me. I need that." He sounded tired, worn. But even in that exhaustion, he found space for her. "Are you sleeping okay? Are you eating enough? Don't roll your eyes, I know you. You forget to take care of you when you're busy loving someone else." Elaine pressed pause. That line hit her like a stone dropped in still water. She had heard those exact words once before from her mother, when Elaine was in college and had taken on too much. You forget to take care of yourself when you're busy loving others. And now she heard it again, decades earlier, from the man her mother rarely spoke about. The line didn't just echo, it connected. As if somehow, despite the years in silence, they had left clues for her. The December tape was harder. "They told me I might not make it home for Christmas after all," he said. "I'm trying to stay calm. Don't want to make promises I can't keep. But God, I want to see her." There was pain in his voice. Not panic. Just longing. Elaine found herself holding the recorder with both hands, bracing herself against the sorrow that wrapped itself gently around every word. He told a story about a man in the barracks who got a letter with a lipstick kiss on it, and how jealous he felt. Not of the kiss, he clarified. Of having something tangible. Something real. "Everything here feels like fog. But you're my anchor." He didn't mention her by name that time. Just the baby. But the way he said it, low, reverent, like prayer, made Elaine feel more seen than most people had in her adult life. By the time she reached the final tape, January 1965, she didn't hesitate. She brewed tea, wrapped herself in the same blanket, and sat on the couch. The air felt different. Denser, maybe. She pressed play. "Hey, sweetheart. I don't know when this one will reach you. Might be a while. Things are shifting fast over here. But I'm still here. Still thinking about you too. Every day." He sounded steady again. Stronger. "Sometimes I picture us all walking to the corner store. You holding her hand, me carrying a bag of groceries. It's such a stupid, boring dream. But I'd trade everything for it." Elaine closed her eyes, letting the image wash over her. "I keep writing these in case I can't say it in person. Not because I'm afraid. Just because I want something left behind. Something real. If she ever listens to these, and I hope she never has to, I want her to know that I was more than a uniform. That I had dreams. That I wanted to teach her how to ride a bike. How to skip rocks. How to say I'm sorry when she means it, and never when she doesn't." The silence that followed felt endless. Then, tell her I loved her. Not just in name. Not just as a father. But as a man who wanted to watch her become whoever she was meant to be. And tell her it's okay to cry. That strength isn't about holding back. It's about holding on. The tape clicked off. Elaine didn't move. Not for a very long time. When she finally stood, she gathered all the tapes and placed them in a small wooden box. She labeled it simply, Dad 1964 to 65. She didn't feel finished, but she felt full. For the first time in her life, she had a story, not just a shadow to wrap around the word father. And somehow that story, told in quiet 10-minute pieces, felt more alive than any photo album ever had. Elaine didn't listen to the tapes again for almost a week, not because she couldn't bear to, but because something had shifted in her that required silence to settle. The voice of her father had stirred the air inside her soul in ways she hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for. After hearing them all, after holding his words like a fragile treasure left just for her, she found herself walking differently, slower, more deliberate, as if each step were being taken by someone who had been walking half a life, without knowing where the other half had gone. She'd started writing in a notebook she found in one of her mother's kitchen drawers, one that still smelled faintly of nutmeg and old ink. She didn't call it a journal. She called it a conversation. Each morning, she sat at the window where the light came in thick and golden, opened the notebook, and wrote to him. "Good morning," she wrote one day. "You'd laugh if you saw me now. Hair tied up in the same scarf Mom used to wear when she baked. The same cuddle. The same quiet. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with your voice, Dad. It's not haunting. It's not painful. It's grounding. Like I finally touched something that's been waiting." On another page she wrote, "I know now why Mom never played the tapes. Not because she didn't love you, but because she did too much. Maybe she was afraid they'd undo her. Maybe she thought they'd undo me. Maybe she was right." Elaine didn't need answers. She needed to keep listening. Not to the tapes now, but to what they had awakened. She found herself rearranging the house, not redecorating, but reclaiming. She hung one of her father's old photos in the hallway. Not a military one. A casual shot of him barefoot in jeans laughing. She placed the tapes in a carved wooden box and set it beside the photo. Not as a shrine, but as a kind of heartbeat. Something living. She started calling him Dad, out loud. Not awkwardly, not forcefully, just naturally. One evening, while clearing out the last of her mother's bedroom drawers, she found a stack of letters tied with green ribbon, all addressed to her father. None of them sent. Elaine sat on the floor and read them one by one. They weren't dramatic. They were ordinary, aching in the way only honesty can ache. I missed you today when the faucet broke, one read. Elaine tried to help me fix it. She wore your old cap and said, I'm the boss now. She's a piece of you, through and through. Another simply said, you would have made a great father. I see it every time she laughs. Elaine held that letter in her hands for a long time, feeling the weight of what was and what wasn't. The next morning, she wrote in her notebook, she kept you alive, didn't she? Just not out loud. That afternoon, she did something unexpected. She recorded herself reading one of her father's letters aloud. She used an app on her phone, unsure of why she was doing it until she heard her own voice echoing back the words he had spoken decades ago. The softness in her tone surprised her. The steadiness. She listened to it twice, then saved it under the title message for Dad. She began doing it more often, reading old letters, reading her own, recording tiny pieces of this rediscovery. Her voice, his words. His voice, her reflections. It became a rhythm, a quiet duet across time. She began to feel, for the first time, like she hadn't missed him entirely, like he hadn't vanished, like part of him had simply been sleeping inside her voice all along. One day, sitting by the window with her notebook open and the late afternoon sun falling gently across the floor, she wrote a single sentence. Maybe we meet our parents not when we're children, but when we're finally old enough to understand the silence they carried. She closed the book. She didn't need to write anything more that day. Instead, she sat in the stillness. A kind of stillness that didn't feel empty but full. Full of things once lost, now remembered. Full of a man's voice that had once crossed an ocean and a war and 5 decades to find her. And in that stillness, Elaine knew, some stories don't end. They simply find new ways to begin. Elaine had always believed healing came in moments, sudden, sharp, cinematic. Like the kind of transformation people spoke about in books, when a single revelation turns a life around in the span of a paragraph. But this wasn't that. What she was experiencing now wasn't loud or linear. It was quiet, cellular, and slow. The kind of healing that reshaped you not all at once, but in increments, the way a shoreline changes shape wave by wave. It had been 3 weeks since she'd heard the final tape, and yet the voice of her father still echoed through the house in small ways, in the way she folded towels more carefully, in the way she paused at the front door before stepping outside, in the way she had started humming to herself without noticing. She no longer reached for noise to fill the silence. The television stayed off. The radio collected dust. Even the sound of her own breathing had become something sacred, proof that she was here, and so, somehow, was he. One afternoon, Elaine took a walk through the neighborhood where she grew up, something she hadn't done in years. The trees were taller now, the sidewalks cracked, the mailboxes newer, but the air felt the same. She passed the corner store her father once mentioned in a tape, the one he dreamed of walking to with her in his arms. It was still there, now a coffee shop with too much glass and not enough charm, but the bones of it remained. She stood across the street and imagined the 3 of them, her mother, her father, and a chubby-legged toddler version of herself, walking in rhythm. The image felt both real and impossible, like a memory borrowed from someone else's life. She whispered, "We made it," not to anyone in particular, but the wind caught the words anyway. When she returned home, she pulled out the notebook again, but this time, she didn't write to her father. She wrote to herself. "Dear Elaine," she began, "I'm proud of you. For listening. For staying. For not running from the ache." The words came easily. She wrote about how she used to feel like a puzzle with one missing piece, and how now, even though the piece hadn't snapped perfectly into place, she no longer felt hollow. She wrote about the comfort of knowing he had tried, not perfectly, not completely, but deeply. She wrote about her mother's quiet grief, and how it had somehow shielded them both from the weight of the world. And she wrote about the woman she was becoming, slower, softer, less afraid of the past. The next morning, Elaine received a call from her niece, Katie, her sister's daughter, 29, sharp and skeptical and kind. Katie had heard from a neighbor that Elaine was still staying in the old house. "Aren't you sick of it yet?" she asked, laughing. "That place always smelled like attic." Elaine smiled and said, "I like the attic now." That caught Katie off guard. "You? The attic?" "Yeah," Elaine said. "It's where I found my father's voice." A pause. "Wait, what?" And so, Elaine told her. Not everything, not at once, but enough. About the box, the recorder, the tapes, the quiet that had filled the house with meaning. Katie listened, and for the first time in years, Elaine felt heard, not for what she did, or what she carried, but simply for what she had found. A few days later, Katie visited. She brought pastries and questions. They sat in the kitchen, suns spilling across the table, and Elaine played one of the tapes, the October one. As the voice filled the room, Katie leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes wide. "He sounds young," she whispered. "He was," Elaine said. "Younger than you are now." When the tape ended, they sat in silence. Then Katie asked, "Can I hear more?" And just like that, the tapes became something new, not just a bridge between father and daughter, but a thread stretching across generations. Over the next week, Elaine digitized the tapes, carefully labeling each file, creating backup copies, storing them in the cloud. She wasn't tech-savvy, but Katie helped. Together, they created a folder titled "For Her to Know Him." Elaine had never planned to share them. But now, she saw how the voice that once felt like a private resurrection could become a public kind of balm. Something that reminded others that even what's lost can sometimes be found again, even if only in echoes. One evening, Katie asked if she could play the voice for her own daughter someday, when she was old enough to understand. Elaine nodded, tears in her eyes. "Let her hear," she said. "Let her know she comes from someone who loved before he ever arrived." That night, Elaine wrote one final letter in her notebook, not to her father, not to herself, but to her mother. "Dear Mom," she began, "thank you for keeping them. I understand now. I know why you couldn't play them. It wasn't weakness. It was protection, not just of me, but of yourself. I see your strength now. The kind that says, 'I will carry this alone so you don't have to.' You did. And now I can too, but not in silence. I'll carry it in song." She closed the book and watched the wind stir the curtains. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt held. And for the first time in her life, Elaine understood that listening, truly listening, is sometimes the most sacred form of love. The tapes had all been played, the notebook pages nearly filled, and still, Elaine found herself waking up each day with the sense that something was still unfolding, not in the past, but in her. She had begun to notice the smallest things, the sound of her feet on old floorboards, the way sunlight warmed the corner of her mother's bedroom in the early morning, the scent of coffee brewing becoming less about caffeine and more about presence. The tapes had ended, yes, but what they had begun in her was far from over. One morning, without really planning it, she returned to the attic. Not to search, but to sit. She brought a cushion, a blanket, and her tea. It was quiet up there, the kind of quiet that hums with memory. She sat beside the empty wooden trunk, now cleaned and polished, and whispered, "I'm still listening." Not to a voice, but to something deeper, what remained when all the words had already been said. A few days later, Katie came back with her daughter, Lucy, barely 3, all curls and wonder. Elaine watched the little girl explore the house, stopping to inspect knobs, corners, sunlight patterns. At one point, Lucy wandered into the hallway and paused at the photo of Elaine's father, the one in jeans, barefoot, laughing. She looked at it for a long time. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing. Elaine smiled. "That's someone very special," she said. "Someone who couldn't stay long, but loved longer than most people get to." Lucy nodded solemnly, as only a child can. "He looks nice." "He was," Elaine whispered. That night, after Lucy had gone to sleep and Katie had gone home, Elaine sat alone again at the kitchen table. But she didn't reach for the tapes or the notebook. She reached for something new, a letter. one she would never send, but needed to write. It began simply, "Dear Dad." She wrote of everything, the first time she heard his voice, the way her hands shook, the way his laughter felt like home. She told him about her mother's quiet courage, her niece's open heart, the granddaughter who had paused at his picture as if she already knew him. She told him how she used to believe absence was an ending, but now she understood that sometimes absence leaves room for the sacred. "I didn't know I missed you until I met you," she wrote. "And now I see that you've always been here. Not in ghost stories, not in shadows, but in the way I pause before I speak, in the way I forgive too easily, in the way I cry when music swells. I'm yours in all the softest ways." She folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box with the tapes. It didn't need to go anywhere. It had already reached its destination. Months passed. The house slowly emptied. Elaine packed things with care, offering items to family, donating others, keeping only what truly felt like it carried breath. But the tapes, though, stayed. She moved to a smaller home, a quiet space with large windows and soft walls. She placed the wooden box on a shelf in her living room, beside a vase of wildflowers and a small speaker. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she played one of the recordings again, not to cry, but to remember how it felt to be found. One spring morning, she was sitting by the window when a letter arrived unexpected. It was from a woman in another state who had somehow come across the digitized versions of the tapes. Katie had uploaded them quietly, privately, as a project in a family history forum. The woman had lost her father too, never heard his voice. And now, hearing Elaine's father speak, she wrote, "I know it's not my dad, but it felt like someone remembered me anyway." Elaine sat with that for a long time. The voice that once brought her to tears had now brought comfort to a stranger. The echo had become a bridge. That evening, she walked to the small park near her new home. The air was cool, the sky bruised with the color of twilight. She sat on a bench and watched a little girl teach her younger brother how to blow bubbles. She laughed, the kind of laugh that spills from the soul. And in that moment, Elaine realized something she hadn't before. Her father never got to raise her, never walked her to school, never gave a toast at her wedding, never helped her move boxes or hang pictures. But through the gift he left behind, his voice, he had taught her the most important thing: how to show up, even when you can't. How to leave something behind that doesn't fade. And how to love across distance and time. She stood up, hands in her coat pockets, the wind tugging gently at her scarf. She whispered, not to the sky, not to the wind, but inward, "I heard you, Dad. I really did." And as she walked home under a canopy of quiet stars, she knew this truth deep in her bones. Some people leave too soon, but their voices stay soft, steady, waiting in the attic of our hearts for the day we are ready to listen.